Welcome to another episode of Unraveling Success. I am so excited today to have our guest, Lona Cook, with us. Lona lives in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, with her husband, Kyle, and their kiddos. Lona owns Cook Chiropractic, Cook Consulting, and is also in real estate. So she is multi-passionate. She's been in business for 14 years now, which me too. So we have that in common. A little bit of seasonality there. And your hobbies in your spare time are yoga, reading, running, and traveling, which I love. That's very well rounded. And keys to success, which are great, is being scrappy, willing to dig in and go deeper, leaning into growth and discomfort to learn, and looking at everything from really an energetic perspective, which is really powerful. That really stood out to me because one of the things I really do with my team is we are always repeating and looking for like wins and doing a lot with like recognition. So like really taking time to do our best to keep everything in like a really elevated, we do a lot with like mindset and how that works. So so welcome, Lona.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. You've been on my list for a long time.
Well, thanks. I'm glad we navigated technology to make this happen today.
Me too. So let's jump right in. And if you would share with us your definition of success.
Yeah. So again, one of my mentors said to me, like, be careful how you define success because you're going to spend a lifetime pursuing it, right? And sort of that warning of like, you get to set that container. So for me, I look at it like, I don't look at success just like a financial aspect. I think there is a component that I want to feel like I have abundance and I can live an abundant lifestyle. But it's also like, do I feel vital? Do I feel alive? Can I do the things I want to do with my time and with the people I choose to do them with? And it kind of speaks back into that energetic component is like, if it's not filling my cup up, like I'm not going to probably be doing it for too long. That doesn't mean I'm not willing to do the gritty stuff. It means that there must be purpose in it, that I feel like that's the reason I put my feet on the floor for me to want to keep going forward with it. To me, that's success, is working towards the things that you feel like you were called to do and living a life that's in alignment with that.
Yeah. And it is so easy to say, but it's so hard to do. And I don't know if this is your experience, but I've been surprised in my life as I've navigated my career and I intentionally left a place that I was growing, but shouldn't have been growing. And after I left that situation for me and started out on my own, it was an eye-opening for me because I realized how many people allow themselves to stay planted and to grow in areas that they shouldn't be growing.
Yeah, I hear that. I think it's cultural on some level that we have been indoctrinated with this idea that work is supposed to be monotonous and that, you just stay for a paycheck or you stay for the benefits, or life on some level is like you stop living after like you turn a certain age almost. It's like you've made all the choices. And that to me is like, everything, every strand of my DNA sort of rebels against that because it's like, we were put here to be alive the entire time, the entire process of life. And to me, that's part of success, is recognizing like you get to live life on your terms.
Yeah. I agree with that. I oftentimes with my business will be asked like, what's your exit plan? Or when do you plan on retiring? And it's funny because that idea to me is so foreign because I love my life now. I love what I do right now. And I'm not really looking forward to it ending. And I don't really, at some point, maybe, but it doesn't, if it's bringing me joy and I'm playing on my areas of strength, like then it's actually bringing life to me. And it's not draining me. And so I almost feel like retirement almost feels foreign to me simply because I don't feel like I need a break from what I'm doing. And a funny thing is my mom is 75 and she is actually writing a book. Like she used to be a Montessori school teacher. So she actually like has this book that she's working on getting published. And I just think that's so cool. Like, yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what drew you originally to chiropractic.
Yeah. In 11th grade, I think is when it solidified in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. I grew up going to a chiropractor. I didn't know that a lot of people didn't know that much about holistic health or what chiropractic really was about, your spine and your nervous system and how important that is to your well-being. So to me, I just thought it was like dentistry on some level, that everybody had a dentist. Everyone knows to go to the dentist. I thought chiropractic was very much the same. And I actually think that belief system has served me very well. That to me, I just always knew it's good for you because I grew up getting adjusted. And I thought people can understand simple concepts. And it actually is a fairly simple concept to recognize that your spine protects your spinal cord and your nerves. Why wouldn't you want that to be freely moving and healthy?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just loved the idea that my chiropractor growing up helped people with her hands, and that it was like this really artful thing, but at the same time, like you're helping people thrive and live and heal their bodies. So that's how I decided to go in. And I heard this term maybe like a few months ago, and I thought that's it. Like it was the idea that most of us are actually accidental entrepreneurs. And I would say that I am an accidental entrepreneur in the sense that I went into chiropractic because I loved the concept of chiropractic and helping people. And then somewhere along the way had the idea that I'm going to open my own practice. And partly because that's the way that I'm going to be able to do this thing called chiropractic. And I found myself becoming an entrepreneur with probably very little credibility to actually know that I should be opening my four walls of my practice. But you figure it out as you go, probably out of necessity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because that's how my family has grown up too, is like my kids have, my husband is by trade a chiropractor. So, so that's just been like what our family does and is, and that's the normal.
Right.
And it's so interesting. I remember, my kids went through grade school, and then we pulled them and homeschooled them all the middle school years. And then they went back for high school. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting to me to watch. In elementary school, because you're a lot more involved and the kids a little bit more when they're, so young, and you're way more involved than when they're older. And just watching like how my kids thought, and then also just the wellness of my children in the schools. Like they were sick and like half the class would be out, and I'm like, but my kids literally, I think in the entire, both of them, between two of my kids, right, in all of elementary school, I think we probably had like 2 sick days. Like it just didn't happen. So yeah, it's very much our normal as well. And it's very interesting to watch now my kids, they are upcoming junior and senior, and how they think. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. No, I get that. And as a chiro kid myself, there's so many things that I just didn't even have context for, because, we still sometimes use modern medical stuff, but it was always that we were going to the chiropractor usually first. And so, that boundary of like the sacredness of like the body's innate ability to heal was always just established as like an idea, at least, that we could trust our bodies. And, I realize now that many people don't know that. Right.
Yeah. So. I think this is kind of going in a different subject, but I think a lot in society, we've almost been taught not to trust our bodies. It's almost like the opposite. And it's something that I've had to learn a lot. Like almost unlearn or relearn or reframe for my own personal self. And then also like even just as a woman, like now in my 40s, and that's a whole different world too. So, okay. So let's chat. Let's say, so you go through chiropractic school, graduate, did you immediately start your own practice, or did you kind of get wet behind the ears and then jump in as your entrepreneur self.
Yeah, no. And when we were preparing for this, you had said like, what were like the difficulty you love the best because of what it's done for you. There's many, right? But if I think about the thing that really birthed me into the person that I probably am today, is that I thought coming out of chiropractic school, first of all, I thought I was going to move across the country to San Diego. I thought I was going to go to work for a job I already had lined up there. And, when life has other plans for you, there was a series of events that just stopped me cold in my tracks. Essentially, I got held up at gunpoint first in Costa Rica. I came home. The place I was going to move into out in California, everything started going wrong with that option. And so I was scrambling to figure out where I was going to move. There was just one thing after another that were kind of major things. And the chiro I worked for at the time, just finishing up my schooling, she said, when are you going to see the writing on the wall? You're not meant to go in this direction. And I was very bullheaded. And so I thought, well, because I said I was going to do it, I have to do it. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time in my life, I remember driving home from St. Paul back here to Chippewa Falls and crying in the car, which was unlike me because I was very, probably to a fault, very bullheaded and also very unemotional about things. Mm-hmm. And now looking back, I think that was just learned behavior. But it was the first time I gave myself permission to back down on something where I can consciously remember feeling like, I don't know what to do next. And I felt like a failure because I had said I was going to go take this position. And it just felt like every ounce of what was happening in my life was trying to not have me go in that direction. And I could force it, or I could actually see the writing on the wall and be humbled enough to say, maybe I'm not supposed to move out there. So the day before I was going to drive out there with my mother, I get home. She's packing stuff up. And I said, I don't know if I'm going in the morning. And she just looked stunned, right? She was just so unexpected that I would even say that, because for years I had been saying, I'm out of the Midwest. I'm leaving. This is where I'm headed. And she's like, okay. And so I said, I'm going to bed. I was exhausted. I had been abroad to Costa Rica where the gunpoint situation had happened. And then I'd come home and I had gotten out rid of my apartment in St. Paul. And I was in this process of moving out to California. And I just was I was exhausted. And so I woke up in the morning and I had just obviously also been finishing chiropractic school. I woke up in the morning and I told her, I'm not going. I don't know what I'm doing next, but I'm not going. And, so I think I gave myself about 24 hours to just feel that for a moment of holy shit, I am not going. And then I realized very quickly I needed to figure out what was my next plan going to be. And so I spent some time, I had a chiro that took me under his wing for a little bit. And, I did my last things that I needed to do for schooling in his office. And he offered me a position. And I remember feeling that was a good offer. I just don't think I can take it. And so I looked at a few other job positions and I looked at the one thing I said I was never going to do, which was moving back home. And where did I end up? Back home. And I opened my practice right from the get-go. So I was 25 years old. Didn't know a thing about business really. But just there was just so much weird stuff that happened. You talk about paying attention to energy, right? And it was the doors were closing over here. And at the same time, weird, I'm talking bizarre, easy stuff. A woman called my parents' house and said, I heard Lona may open a practice. I didn't know this woman. My mom didn't know this woman. I heard Lona may open a practice. And I'm newly divorced. I don't have a job. I would love to volunteer my time to help her. She can give me a call here. And I thought, who does that? Who volunteers their time for someone they don't even know? So I call her and I go have coffee with her because I was like, this is just bizarre. And she's the mom who, is totally granola, down the rabbit hole on a lot of the natural stuff. She just didn't know that much about chiropractic. And so she was my first assistant. And I didn't pay her the first month she worked. And as soon as obviously we started making money, then I obviously did my best to keep paying her as she was worth her weight in gold at that point. But it was okay, the juxtaposition in my life at that time between how hard things had felt for a little bit. And then all of a sudden this door blasts open in the direction that I never thought I would move. And all things start to fall in alignment. I was like, I would have had to be really, really dense to not pay attention to that. And that to me is like, if I think about my life in black and white and my life turning into like color and success and like a more well-rounded human, there was many challenges that came after that point, but that was the starting of it all for me. It was like, okay, I'm going to be different than I normally would have been. And I'm going to give myself the grace to make a new decision, even though that felt really foreign to me. And that humbling was exactly the thing I needed to do to like, I think, open up this next opportunity, which was to launch my first practice.
Right. So yeah, like crash course in adaptability.
Yes.
Not getting married to the way that things are going to work out. Yeah.
Right.
I can definitely understand that. So that was 14 years ago. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I graduated November 2009, and we opened our doors to the practice that I sit in right now that has been multi times remodeled / taken on more square footage at that time. I now own this building. But that started January 2010. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. And
on a loan,
Yeah, I get that. Same here.
Mm-hmm.
So how many practices do you have currently?
Yep. So I just sold. So I've had 4 practices. This was my original one. I still practice a day and a half a week and then have a team built around me here. And then this practice is now the only practice I practice in. And I also co-own one that is a school-based practice where we go in and work with kids that are like neurodiverse in the school system, bringing chiropractic into the public school setting. And so that practice, I am the founder of it, but also I am still co-owner. And my other 2 practices I've had, which I had business partners in, we actually just settled our contract and I sold my portion of it last month. So I am now just in my main office and the school-based practice as far as the practices.
Awesome. So then then let's do this. Let's have you share the journey from you opened up, from scratch your first clinic.
Yep.
And then share with me just kind of like your progression of how you grew and just like, obviously then too, you have like an entrepreneurial visionary spirit, especially with the whole school piece of what you're doing. Like I could not love that more because there is such a need for that population, for what you're doing. Like that is giant. So just if you want to kind of map out your journey.
Yeah. I think, when I think about business and healing, they're in like success in business and success in health. They're not so different in many ways because it is all energetics on some level. And it's not random, right? It's not random that, Beth, you shared that your children were so healthy, right? You're very intentional about these things. And so same thing with practice growth and business growth, like paying attention to this like desire to keep growing. So as I found myself opening this first practice, there was like some marked things I think about when I look at like the trajectory the last 14 years has been. At first it was just like sheer scrappy energy that allowed us to like get open in this space, paint the walls ourselves, figure out what we didn't know through the course of hard knocks, as well as trying to like find business coaches and consultants that could help me. And I remember a marked place, and I think it was about a year in, where it was like getting busier in the practice, and we were like productive enough that like I was paying myself, and it felt good, quote unquote, meaning like we were doing it. And at the same time, I just felt like I have a house of cards. Like if I don't show up, nobody knows what's happening. There's not a system really in place for almost anything. Now, maybe I'm being hard on myself now, but at the time it just felt like this has been a lot to lift this baby practice. And at the same time, there's no way that I can remove one fingertip at this point because it's all happening through like guts essentially. And that was when I really like sought out my first, like very, I had a coach at that point, but I felt like this next consultant I had really helped me understand business and finances, and that I was going to really need to bone up on what I was doing from like a perspective of like, you own a business at this point, it needs to start to run like a business. And so as I got systems both internally in place, as well as in like how I dealt with money coming into the practice, the exchange, which money is a form of exchange, it's just energy,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so as I realized, like, I can steward this better, I can have a way that everything feels more fluid when I take good care of not only the people who are going to lay on my table from a clinical standpoint, but also like taking great care of like the people who are working with me, as well as being a good steward of the financial exchange that's happening for giving great service, right? Like that all felt congruent as I learned those things and I could like implement them. Then the practice really started to shoot up. So about 3 years in, I realized I got married, first of all, and my husband owned an electrical contracting business in the Twin Cities. So out of necessity, we ended up moving about 70 miles away from the primary practice. And he was going to commute one way and I was going to commute, to the east. And I also was crazy enough at that moment to think like, well, I just built this other practice to this level. Why not open a second one? And little did I know, again, like, when you think about like how little it's just like, in some ways it's a blessing, right? It's a curse too, but it's a blessing of just like, had I known what I was about to find out, I wouldn't probably have never had the like gall to go after it.
Mm-hmm.
But I opened the second location. And so I talk about, scrappiness, right? Like, and I didn't have kids at that time, but I was waking up, driving an hour to my main practice, practicing all day, to drive an hour back to the second practice, to have night hours that only obviously were going to grow to a certain extent. And so very quickly I realized, A, I needed another doctor in my office. B, I probably needed a partner in the second practice. And there was just this element of like, you must build team at this point. There's no way like you're going to kill yourself or you're going to be divorced before you even were married a year, or,
Right.
like any of this. And so luckily the decision in my mind of like, this is not sustainable. Like when you talk about manifestation and energy, when you make decisions, which is where I think a lot of people go wrong, they never decide, right? They stay on that fence of like, it could be a million different ways and they don't make a decision and therefore it doesn't manifest, right? One foot in, one foot out. Quickly I hired an associate who ended up being then my business partner down the road. And then I found a business partner for the second practice. So she bought in. So I went from being the solo doc to 3 docs pretty quickly. And then obviously we had assistants building around the practice as well. So we went to 2 locations at that point. And I quickly found that like, I needed to realize that what worked for me in building the original practice to a certain level was just my version of it, that when I was teaching it to a different person with their own lens, as well as a different persona, I was humbled again in like, oh, not everyone's going to think about this the way that I do. And maybe the way that I teach it isn't going to work when I'm training, a certain personality style versus a different personality style. I'm going to have to learn how to say this in different ways and help enroll them in this vision in a different way. So, it's really never stopped at that point, is really realizing how to become a better leader to the people that you're attracting into the team that are going to bring skill sets you don't have and also perspectives you don't have. And that is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. Like it's a really good thing to have a team that's bought in for a common mission, but with different skill sets and different pieces of the puzzle that they can see and bring more clarity to. And I also, I think I didn't really realize this until I got into business, but the thing I love about chiropractic is like, it's an art form and it's really deep when you get into the philosophy of it too. But at the same time, there's things that, because most of us are not wired as business people and whatnot, like there was like a lot of gaps I felt that like I wanted to fill within my level of influence. So for like the young chiropractor at that time, I wrote a book that was called Just Tell Me Where to Start, because my background actually before going into chiropractic in undergrad was in creative writing. So I put this book out there, again, probably not knowing if this is a good, bad, or other thing. I just felt called to write it and I didn't question it. I wrote it, I self-published it, and I like sent it out to my mentors. Well, then they started inviting me to conferences to speak because I think I scratched the itch for a lot of people. I was like young in practice, female. And so I found myself in these circles that I probably had no business being in on some level yet anyways, but I was in the room and I got to learn and just take in so many mentors in chiropractic, both in business and in philosophy and healing. And then I'd bring my team with, so we all got developed to the next level. And so like our street cred and our just hours set, like refining our craft just went through the roof then compared to probably like the average practice at that point. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where then we just kept growing and my vision kept expanding on like how many people we could really reach and how much influence we could have on changing like healthcare trajectories and bringing more people into like the knowledge base that like you and I, Beth, have because we've been exposed to it, but somebody had to peel back the layers for us to help us understand how to make these decisions. So that's really where then, you know, we opened a third practice, and then the school practice really was one of those funny things that like, I just felt this internal nudge, like you're not playing big enough. And it wasn't like an egoic thing. It was more like you need to like wield some influences in places that don't maybe have this type of influence. And so again, divine timing of having conversations, one thing led to another where we first started bringing chiropractic into the staff. And after a year of doing that, one of the admins said, why can't we do this with the students? And I said, I don't know, you tell me. She's like, I am telling you, that's my job. My job is to bring things in for the students. And for me, I was a little scared. So you talk about these things that like birth you, right? Like I was like, I don't know anyone else doing this, you know? So I called some of my mentors and they helped me, you know, get a framework for how I was going to do it. And then, you know, like off the podcast, we were talking about how, you know, sometimes you have these hard things that happen and a lot of people would have just stopped. Right. And, you know, so there was hard things during that time because I was running to the schools and then running back to the practice, and I was still in full-time practice, but I was trying to go to schools. And then my license got turned in by another chiropractor to the state board who didn't like that we were bringing care into the schools and called my like documentation or something like that into question. But of course I was scared. I was like, okay, now my license is under review and I have to send in all my documentation. And I thank God for having great mentors around me because they said like, you know, when this type of stuff happens, it's likely because you're ruffling feathers and you're making change, right? So just stay the course. Yep. Send the stuff in. 18 months later, they threw the case out. It was fine. I had what I needed. But it was one of those defining moments of like, are you going to shut down? Like, do you really dream of doing this? Are you really going to keep moving forward? Do you know that you might be under scrutiny because a lot of other people aren't doing this? So you're going to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. And it was a refining moment that helped us. Now we have this practice that we think is pretty amazing that's happening in the schools. And we're doing research with some worldwide chiropractic researchers trying to show what's happening to the like cortical function in children as they receive a chiropractic adjustment. None of that would have happened had I just gotten scared off, you know, the first year in of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be here, you know? So
yeah. You didn't let yourself shrink.
No. Yeah. It just kept, and the vision to me, like having something bigger than your own fears is really what pulls people into these next iterations. So if I really think back, I think a lot of it is just being comfortably uncomfortable in the idea of like, it's okay that you're going to have to transform continually in this process of walking this out. But it goes back to your original question of like, what is success to you? Like, I don't believe I was placed here to just like be comfortable in this like experience. I think like this is part of what we're meant to do. And then I attract team members who also have like this calling, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, you hit on so many good things. One is I can really relate to the whole, I actually have gotten to the point, and you'll probably be able to relate to this, that if I'm not uncomfortable in some way, I'm uncomfortable because I'm so used to living in those areas that are like stretching me. And
Yes.
I go for that. Like, that's what I seek.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm in, because I think I'm probably terrified of getting complacent or having
Mm-hmm.
that drive in me, like the edge coming off of it. So
Yeah.
even to the fact that, like, it's been almost a month, but I started, this is not traditionally something I would do, but I started kickboxing. So I
Oh,
was
that's
like,
awesome.
we had, my friend and I had an invite to a kickboxing studio, and I was like, that sounds terrifying. Oh, I guess I should try. And so, and it's so fun. I have had a complete blast doing it, but I'm also just like, I would have never in a million years imagined I'd do that. But I think part of it is like, it's brand new. I have no idea what I'm doing. It is wildly uncomfortable. And it's like doing what I need it to do right now, as far as like stretching me and challenging me, and it's
Mm-hmm.
completely foreign.
Right.
But that's on a personal level side,
Mhm.
but they both, it transfers. It's just that whole like getting uncomfortable piece of.
Well, and I love that too, because we may be addicted to getting uncomfortable in our business life on some level. And then like, we had talked about like what's happening in the rest of your life, right? Because you might not be growing there if you're not pushing your own envelopes. And that doesn't necessarily mean it is like, there's an element too, I've learned that like, I'm actually more productive if I give myself like rest and grace and
Yeah,
like, it's okay to not have to be like balls to the wall on everything, right? Which is an art form in and of itself. And motherhood has been so healing for me on that part of it, because I want to play with my kids sometimes. I want to take a nap when my babies are little, like,
yeah.
whereas 10 years ago, that really wasn't part of my repertoire, that play.
I went through a coaching program a couple years ago, and I got a lot out of that program. But one of the things that I think of that she would preach was a leisure hustle. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that, because like now I get up at like 4:20 in the morning. My classes always start at 5 in the morning. So I need to be like up and out the door. But I love that, because when I come home, I literally let myself just like, I drink my coffee, I read a book, I just kind of have at least half an hour where I can just like do my own thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not rushed. I typically, like, I'll check in with the office like just online at 8, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't take meetings typically until 9.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if you think about it, if I'm up at 4:20 and you have until 9 o'clock between like your morning routine and working out and getting ready, like that is and I mean, I do stuff during that time. I
Mm-hmm.
journal, I do, but it is not, there's no rush there. And I get
Yeah.
up early intentionally so that I can start my day in a way where I'm taking control of it. But it's
Mhm.
also like, I'm not running into it with my hair on fire. Like I'm not rushed.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't
That's
know if this resonates with you, but for me, the further I've gotten into business and making sure like I'm taking care of like every component in my life, which is including myself,
mhm.
see other people that are just so crazy hair on fire. It is like, for me, I'm like, oh, that is
Mhm.
me. It's one of my biggest turnoffs. I'm like, stop, just
Right.
stop.
Right. Yeah. I think what I felt from myself in that kind of like evolution is like before having kids, I was very much in my masculine, which is like straight
Yeah.
line. You do it this way. Like, yes, you got to get up early because if you don't, someone's ahead of you, like more from a race, right? Like you get up early because it's a race, right? And you must get these things in, you must, right?
Yeah.
And then I think what I have felt since having kids, well, first of all, I realized like if you set, like for instance, let's say the journaling and the working out, like if those are non-negotiables on some level, but you need to sleep in because you're tired, right? Like you're going to get the workout and the journaling in and you'll put it in somewhere else, right? Like, and I think that's somewhat the feminine way of doing things, is realizing like everything isn't a hard line all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
what works for one person might not work in that order exactly for you.
For
And
sure.
that doesn't make it wrong. It's like take the
Mhm.
part and make it work for you, and like then stand on your own like 2 feet with it, right? And so I think that's one of the things, especially for women entrepreneurs, is like, well, what season are your kids in? What season are you in?
Yeah.
Like, how's your health right now? Like, and you've probably felt this in your own body where you may have seasons where you're like, I want to kickbox, or I want to do yoga sculpt or I want to train for a marathon. And then there's other seasons where it's like, I need gentle yoga and walks and more time, like listening to like something that's going to bring my nervous system down, So
Yep.
It's like, it's so relevant for you to be paying attention to your own internal like state and then answer those questions, not from a place of like, I'm just tired and I don't want to get out of bed. It's like, what do I really need right now? Maybe I need to get myself out of bed because I've been in a like lethargic place for too long. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. And I'm way more in tune with that than I have ever actually.
Myself too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. So talk to me, you on a personal level, have had some pretty, crazy things happen, like hard personal things. And then also you're growing, your practice, even just like, I can imagine the trajectory that even just being held by gunpoint can take you. And, you've also talked about, navigating motherhood and also while you're growing your practice and even just like keeping a marriage healthy during as a business owner. I mean, it's hard, So chat with me a little bit about some of the personal pieces that you've navigated and how that's maybe impacted you in business or even just grown your capacity or your empathy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, for some people, they'd say it was like their faith. For me, it didn't maybe come from a religious context. It came from, in chiropractic, we say there's something called the major premise. And that is like that there's intelligence in all things, right? That just like your body is constantly showing you things that maybe you don't even pay attention to. It's like instead of thinking it's all wrong, it's like, maybe I should trust my body and maybe what it's showing me, right? Well, as some of these hard things have happened in my life, because I had that foundational belief that like things are not random, right? Like challenges are not random. And what shows up, though it may be unwanted and a surprise, like it's probably meant for me on some level if it's showing up. And so, two of the hardest things that have come up was, number one, I married a guy who I love and he's the perfect complement to me. However, like had I known what I was really getting into, we got married pretty quickly. We got married after 9 months. And I knew him from previous before he ever had kids, but he had 3 kids from like 2 different women. And so there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen in our personal life. Like there's a lot of people's needs that factor in. Certainly when we got married, I had no kids. So I went from like single, no kids, all of that to like Insta family, and not only Insta family, but with other women that certainly need things from my husband. And it was like ripe for me to feel all sorts of like discomfort. And at the same time, I loved him, but I had so much resentment that built over time towards things that I didn't know I was going to feel. And I think the older version of me pressed up against that and wanted to run away. Like I just needed to get out of it. And because, we had signatures on a paper that we were married, it wasn't that easy of like, how do I run away from this? Is this failure? Is this actually what's best for me? Because there was an element to that. I think it was the perfect collision of things to me have to work through some really deep rooted stuff within myself. And because I at least had the awareness that I have attracted Kyle, my husband, I've attracted this scenario, and there's probably things here that I need to work through in a different manner than maybe what feels instinctual at this point. Otherwise, I'm going to keep getting what I've always gotten, which is like what was foundational for me was like the element of like flight or fight. I don't like this, I'm out. Like that would have been my pattern. So to do the opposite where it's like, actually, I'm going to stay and I'm going to work through all of this that I'm like trying to navigate was a really hard part. And it took us years to get to where we are at this point, where I'm not going to say our marriage by any means is perfect, but there is much more understanding. And there were various points where I was like so ready to be gone, and I'm sure him the same way. Right. Yeah. And I look at it now and I think like, well, part of it is because I didn't put the effort in. And the other part of it was we didn't know how to communicate with each other. And there was a lot of hard things. There was many things that from the outside looking in, it'd be easy to see why either one of us would have been like, yeah, we're out. Right.
Yeah.
But now I see we have two boys together, and like, he is the perfect, like, yin yang balance with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful for him in so many ways. And I'm grateful for the growth I had to go through to be able to like actually stay and realize that like there's two sides to this coin. Right. So,
Yeah.
When you feel those really uncomfortable places in your personal life, like, to not also acknowledge you're part of them is self-sabotaging your business life on some level too. Right. So relate it back to like, there is a hole, and you can't have incongruencies. We all do to some extent, but like, to what extent is really like going to crack the foundation. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the really other challenging thing that morphed me was my mom. And I think it's all connected, right? Like the lessons and the growth I had to go through. I've always said that there's some sort of connection between what I went through with my mom and my relationship with Kyle. Probably, again, these like core wounds we have, like somehow where they came from, even if they're not even your own, they might be generational trauma. I have no idea.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But
mm-hmm.
right. My mom, who was like this pristine, like very, like she wouldn't go to the grocery store without her makeup on. And I always felt sort of less than to her, even though I don't know that she ever really wanted me to feel that. I was just louder and, all the things. And so I felt approval from her, but I also felt a lot of dismay from her of who I was. Like, I know she was proud of me, but we just didn't see eye to eye, like a lot of mother-daughter relationships, I'm sure. Right. And so my mom ended up having cancer in 2013. And, that was one thing to walk through, and especially being in holistic health and realizing like, I don't get to make some of the choices for her. She has to make her own choices here.
Yeah.
And so she came through that and did okay, and did some of the traditional things that I did not necessarily think she should do. And again, her choice. And I had some good mentors around me at that point, also letting me know, like, this is not your burden to bear. Like, you need to like support your mom as a daughter, not as like her healthcare provider necessarily, if she's not asking. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then what happened later on is she ended up mental health wise imploding. And we still don't really fully understand if it was like chemo that, affected their brain. There is like a chemo brain, they call it. But to the point that I went from this mom that was always kind of in a perfect, like outside looking in, it looked perfect. Right.
Mm-hmm.
To like this person that didn't get out of bed, didn't eat, didn't shower. We thought she was going to like commit passive suicide on some level because she just had given up fully. Right. Mm-hmm. And, had I known what I know now, 7 years later, which was like, again, if somebody's given up, like, you're not going to be able to like convince them otherwise, but we tried. Right. And so the part of trying, again, trying to heal someone other than yourself, it was so ugly. And, and we saw the inside out of like the mental health institutions. And, I remember taking my brand new baby into like the psych ward and trying to visit with my mom, who had been this picture of like beauty before, and she looked haggard. Like they thought my dad was her son at that point, and so it was just like, how did we get here? Right. Like, how did we get here? And I still don't know really. And so there was this element of like, you talk about chaos in someone's nervous system, right? Like where I was like, I was a new mom. I'm nursing my baby. My dad's showing up at my house, just like unsure of what to do because the wife he's had for decades is imploding, and we don't know if she's going to like self-harm, and we're trying to get her help, but she doesn't want help. And then I'm trying to come to work and take care of like not only my patients, but my team. And not be able to give them really like, if you could have someone like tap into your brain so they could really understand like how much is on you, especially when maybe they don't have kids and they don't have a parent in this regard and they're not running a business. It was one of those times where I just felt like it became very clear who had any sort of empathy for me at that time versus like, okay, I'm just in survival mode right now. Right. And so the grace for myself of learning like, oh my God, I need support right now. And And at the same time, like, you don't know what people are walking through. I won a business entrepreneurial award that year. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm walking up on stage to get this award. And the only thing I wanted at that time was my mom to come out of the mental institution, which all she had to do was take a shower, but she refused to, and they would have released her. Right. And I was like, the juxtaposition was just so great at that point.
Incredible.
And it was like, but nobody knew, like, nobody knows what's going on. Right.
Yeah.
And that for me, I think solidified of just like, my desire to serve people, because you just don't know. You don't even know in your own family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you think you know how things are going to unfold, but then there's curveballs, as well as just like how broken some of the system really is, and why not try and make it better? Mm-hmm. And so, that was a great lesson, not only in just like gratitude for like today, like what's happening right now, and trying to keep your head afloat in today, because if you're worried about what's coming, or you're, regretful over what happened in the past, it's really hard. Right. And then also, like, when we as chiropractors are putting our hands on people and their nervous systems that's lived that life, we can feel things, but we don't know what that person fully is walking through. And so just the power of compassion for just like whoever's on your table, that really opened it out. Because I realized, like, if my mom didn't have her family, she would have been a homeless person at that point. If she didn't have money, she could have been a homeless person. And that was such a like interesting thing for me to realize, like, just how connected we really are and how close we are as humanity from people we maybe judge or don't understand. It's like, it could be anyone. Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It puts things into perspective.
Right.
Big time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Big. Well, Lona, you have a powerful story, and I feel like I've just hit the tip of the iceberg. Thank you so, so, so much for your time. If you are interested in connecting with Lona and learning even more, because she is a wealth of knowledge, all of her contact information will be posted in the show notes. So thank you again, Lona.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Beth. I appreciate it.